There's a specific kind of strength that some people carry quietly. Not the strength of confrontation or demanding answers. The strength of walking away without them. It's invisible from the outside. It looks like indifference to people who don't understand it. But it's not indifference. It's something deeper. It's the ability to find peace without needing the other person to give it to you. To move forward without waiting for an apology that may never come. To close the chapter yourself when the other person left the story unfinished. Maybe you know someone like this. Maybe it's you, that person who can end a relationship, a friendship, a situation, and somehow keep moving even when nothing was resolved. No final conversation, no explanation, no closure. And yet, they're okay. Most people assume that moving on without closure means you didn't care enough. That if it really mattered, you'd need answers. You'd need resolution. You'd need the other person to acknowledge what happened. But that's rarely the full truth. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes the people who don't need closure cared so deeply that waiting for someone else to provide peace became unsustainable. They learned that closure isn't something another person gives you. It's something you give yourself. Psychologically, this capacity doesn't come from emotional detachment. It comes from emotional self-reliance. Research on emotional regulation shows that people who can move forward without external closure have developed what psychologists call internal locus of control. They believe that their emotional state is determined by their own responses, not by other people's actions. When something painful happens and there's no resolution, their brain doesn't get stuck waiting for the other person to make it right. It asks a different question. Not, how do I get them to give me closure? But, how do I create closure for myself? That shift is profound, because it means your peace is no longer contingent on someone else's willingness to participate in your healing. What if needing closure isn't about needing answers? What if it's about needing permission to let go? And what if you could give yourself that permission? When you spend years believing that closure requires the other person's participation, something happens to how you process endings. At first, it feels reasonable. They hurt you, so they should explain. They left, so they should tell you why. They betrayed you, so they should acknowledge the damage. And in a fair world, they would. But the world isn't fair, and your healing can't wait for fairness. So your brain keeps running the same questions. Why did they do it? What did I do wrong? How could they just walk away? And every unanswered question becomes a thread you can't stop pulling. Research on rumination shows that the human mind struggles with unresolved narratives. We're wired to make sense of our experiences, to find patterns, to understand causes and effects. So when a story ends abruptly, when there's no explanation, when the other person disappears without resolution, your brain treats it like an unsolved problem. It keeps working on it, replaying conversations, analysing their last words, searching for clues in old messages. Not because you're obsessive, because your mind is trying to complete a narrative that someone else left unfinished. This doesn't happen because you're weak. It happens because you're human. But it also explains why some people get stuck in that loop and others don't. The difference isn't that some people care less. It's that some people have learned to complete the narrative themselves, to create their own ending when the other person refused to write one. Psychologists call this meaning-making or cognitive closure. It's the ability to construct a coherent understanding of what happened even when you don't have all the information. To say, I may never know why they did what they did, but I know how I'm choosing to interpret it. To accept that their silence is an answer, even if it's not the answer you wanted. To recognise that understanding them isn't required for releasing them. Usually, this capacity develops through necessity. Most people who can move on without closure didn't start that way. They started by waiting, by hoping the other person would come back and explain, by believing that if they just understood why, the pain would make sense and they could finally let go. But the explanation never came. Or it came and it wasn't satisfying. Or it came and it was a lie. And at some point, the waiting became more painful than the original hurt. So they made a choice. Not because they stopped caring, because they cared about their own peace more than they cared about getting answers from someone who'd already shown they weren't going to provide them. They realized that closure isn't a gift someone gives you. It's a decision you make. The decision that this chapter is over, regardless of how it ended, that you're moving forward, regardless of whether they ever acknowledge what they did, that your healing doesn't require their participation. Here's what neuroscience tells us about this process. When you experience a painful ending without resolution, your brain's prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning and decision-making, has to work harder. It has to create closure in the absence of external validation. Studies on emotional regulation and the brain show that people who successfully move on without closure demonstrate higher activity in regions associated with cognitive reappraisal. They're actively reframing the experience, not denying what happened, but choosing how to interpret it in a way that allows forward movement. This isn't delusion, it's agency. It's the recognition that you can't control what they did or didn't do, but you can control what meaning you assign to it. And that meaning determines whether you stay stuck or move forward. We live in a world that tells you closure is something you deserve. That if someone hurt you, they owe you an explanation. That if someone left, they should tell you why. And in an ideal world, they would. But your ancestors didn't have the luxury of waiting for closure. When danger passed, when loss occurred, when relationships ended, they had to keep moving. Survival required forward momentum, not resolution. Your brain still carries that capacity. The ability to grieve without needing the person who hurt you to participate in your grief. To heal without needing them to acknowledge the wound. To find peace without needing them to apologize. But modern culture has taught you to wait, to believe that moving on without answers means you're suppressing or avoiding. That real healing requires confrontation, explanation, resolution, and for some situations that's true. But for others, waiting for closure from someone who's already shown they won't provide it isn't healing, it's self-abandonment. There's a particular loneliness that comes with choosing to move forward alone. You see other people getting the conversations you didn't get, the apologies you didn't receive, the explanations that would have helped you understand. And part of you wonders if maybe you deserved those things too, if maybe you should have demanded them, if maybe letting go without them means you valued yourself less than you should have. But here's what people who've moved on without closure eventually realise. Sometimes the person who hurt you isn't capable of giving you what you need. Not because they're evil, because they're limited. They don't have the self-awareness to explain their behaviour. They don't have the emotional capacity to acknowledge the harm. They don't have the courage to face what they did. And waiting for someone to become capable of something they're fundamentally not ready for is a form of suffering you're choosing. Not weakness, self-preservation, not avoidance, acceptance. Many people who don't need closure to move on aren't emotionally cold. They're emotionally realistic. They understand the difference between what they deserve and what they're likely to receive. And they've made peace with that gap. They've learned that deserving an apology doesn't mean you'll get one. That being owed an explanation doesn't mean it will come. That wanting resolution doesn't make the other person capable of providing it. And here's the hardest part. Sometimes moving on without closure means accepting that you'll never fully understand why it happened. That there will always be questions without answers. That the narrative will always have gaps. And your brain, designed to seek patterns and explanations, will resist that uncertainty. It will keep trying to solve the unsolvable, to make sense of the senseless, to find logic in choices that were never logical. But closure doesn't require understanding. It requires acceptance. Acceptance that some things won't make sense, that some people won't explain themselves, that some endings will always feel incomplete. And you can move forward anyway. What's rarely discussed is how liberating this becomes. When you stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to heal, you realize how much power you'd been giving away. Your peace was hostage to their willingness. Your progress was dependent on their participation. Your healing was contingent on their accountability. And the moment you take that power back, everything shifts. You're no longer stuck in their timeline. You're operating on your own. Research on post-traumatic growth shows that people who develop the capacity for self-directed closure often experience profound psychological benefits. Not just recovery from the specific hurt, but increased resilience overall. They learn that they can survive painful endings even when those endings are messy. That they can heal even when healing isn't convenient for the person who hurt them. That they can close chapters even when the other person wants to leave them open. So if you're someone who's learned to move on without closure, understand this. You're not cold, you're self-reliant. You didn't stop caring, you started prioritizing your own peace over their validation. Maybe the shift isn't about getting better at demanding closure from others. Maybe it's about getting better at creating closure for yourself. Maybe it's recognizing that the explanation you're waiting for won't actually change anything. It won't undo what happened. It won't erase the hurt. It won't give you back the time you lost. Maybe it's understanding that closure isn't about them finally understanding what they did. It's about you finally accepting that they may never understand and choosing to move forward anyway. Because healing doesn't require their participation. Growth doesn't need their acknowledgement. Peace doesn't depend on their apology. You can close the door yourself. You can write your own ending to a story they left unfinished. You can create meaning from an experience that felt meaningless. Not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by refusing to let their absence of accountability keep you trapped. The people who truly heal aren't always the ones who got closure. They're the ones who moved forward without it, who decided that their peace mattered more than their need to understand, who chose to let go even when letting go felt incomplete. So when you're waiting for an apology that isn't coming, when you're searching for an explanation that doesn't exist, when you're hoping for resolution from someone who's already moved on, you have a choice. You can keep waiting, or you can give yourself what they won't. There will still be moments when you wish things had ended differently, when you wish they'd had the courage to face you, when you wish you understood why. That's okay. That's not weakness, that's grief. And grief doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you're human enough to wish for what you deserved even when you're strong enough to move forward without it. But there will also come a day when you realize you haven't thought about them in weeks. When their silence no longer feels like unfinished business. When the questions that used to consume you have simply faded into background noise. And you'll understand that closure wasn't something they could have given you anyway, because closure was never about their words. It was about your decision. The decision that this chapter is over. That you're done carrying what they won't acknowledge. That your healing doesn't require their participation. Maybe that's the deepest truth about people who don't need closure to move on. They didn't stop needing answers because they stopped caring. They stopped needing answers because they learned that peace comes from within. That resolution is something you create, not something you receive. That the ending you write for yourself is more powerful than any explanation they could offer. Not detached, self-reliant, not cold, free, not avoidant, complete. Until then, walk gently with yourself. You don't need their closure. You never did. The power to move forward was always yours.